have a ton of slides. I'm not sure exactly how long this takes, but I've noticed that people need time to ask their questions, and so I'll be certainly happy to answer them at the end. So I want to start with inclusions because I want to just draw a distinction between the pathology of Parkinsonism and other neuropathies or degenerative conditions, and you'll see that they have these things called alpha synuclein inclusions in the neuron, and this actually kind of spans this this body of four main problems, which is Parkinson's disease, Lewy body dementia, multiple system atrophy, and progressive supranuclear palsy. These in essence are have this common pathophysiology, but they have different expressions in which part of the nervous system they affect, and this can give you some different presentations, but they all are a little bit similar in terms of their protein. Now, in contrast, Alzheimer's disease accumulates beta amyloid and tau proteins, and that's not important for us. But just to say that that would differ from what's happening with Lewy body dementia. And there are some clinical differences that we're not going to go into. There's kind of interesting, thought about, why these inclusions happen, and it may have something to do with, the brain's way of, kind of vacuuming out the unneeded proteins, from the cerebral spinal fluid into the circulation to get digested, and there may be a problem there, but I'm not going to say more about that right now. So going on, so the important thing is alpha-synuclein targets the dopamine-containing neurons, and as I'm sure you're aware, dopamine is a hormone, a neural hormone that does a lot of things in the brain. It functions as a motor control hormone. It targets reward centers. It helps wake you up, and so it's got this kind of diverse set of things it can do. And when you start losing these neurons, you can start seeing it in a variety of different ways. I just put three of the big categories, which include excessive daytime sleepiness is fairly common, fragmented sleep, and we'll talk more about that, and circadian alteration. I will talk more about. The two-process model of sleep is really important, and there was a lot of science that goes into this. This is not really a complete model, but it helps us at least clinically get to a point where we need to be. And they have process S, which stands for sleep. That's not a hard one there. And it's the sleepiness that you get by virtue of how long you're awake. And I think anybody in school, or especially college, who pulled an all-nighter knows how much sleepier you are when you stay awake for 24 hours. And so this indicates a homeostatic sleep drive, meaning homeostasis is really interpreted as a balance. And once you try to push the system by staying up later, you're going to be able to sleep more by virtue of this system. And just as a sidelight, this is one area where the brain really operates like a battery, in the sense that when you're awake, you start using up your energy stores, and the thing that's left over becomes a signal for sleep. And until you restore those energy stores, you're going to be sleepier and sleepier. Now, this is also complemented by the circadian process, which is process C, and the circadian rhythm is a rhythm that exists in the body in general, but in the cells individually. Every cell in the body has this system where it can essentially make hay with the sun shines. And, the brain's directive is to try to coordinate those. I mean, you want to have coordination because you want to be awake when you eat, hopefully, and then you want the liver to be digesting food when you eat, so that has to be synchronized as well. And so we'll talk about the first point. It helps us stay awake, and so the circadian system really puts out an alerting signal, which I'll give you a graph of. Um, and it's the withdrawal of that alerting signal in the second half of the night that actually allows us to sleep 8 hours. If we didn't have that, we would probably, be awake for 4 hours, sleep for two, be awake for another four, and sleep for two, and so on and so forth until, we filled up our 24 hours. But it's also important in terms of, what it does is that it regulates body temperature. I mean, we normally have to drop about a full degree when we sleep, so the brain has to cool down. And so this is one of the mechanisms by which it does that. It regulates a lot of different hormone secretions. I'll just pick on one, which is cortisol, which is the stress hormone, but this gets secreted about an hour and a half before you wake up. And so it's one of the ways the brain prepares you to wake up. And, if you've ever been on prednisone for any reason, you'll know that it's an upper. Okay, so it makes sleeping difficult. It coordinates digestion, which we said, and cell division, which is kind of a really interesting thing because they have noted that when you have shift workers, you get more cancers. And so, the regulation of cell division is probably an important thing. And I will say too that there have been some studies that, if you give chemotherapy at a phase where the body is not normally dividing, there's less toxicity to it because the normal cells, aren't in the act of dividing, and they don't get affected as much by the chemotherapy. So there's a whole nother, set of personalized medicine that's going to come of this in the next 20 years, and I think it'll be exciting. So this is the graph. The upper arrows on the top are the homeostatic sleep drive. And what you can see is that, the person in the first half of the slide is getting sleepier and sleepier. And then when you go to sleep, you kind of have this decay of sleepiness. Then on the bottom is that you have this the circadian wake drive. And this is interesting because I don't know if you can see my arrow. It starts off low, but starts to increase until you have the mid-afternoon. Yeah. Okay, I can't hear the comment here, but yeah, there's an alarm going off in my office, of course. But you get this little dip in around 3 p.m., which is kind of when the British drink their tea and the Spanish take their siesta. So, then, after that, in the early evening, you get more of an alerting signal until it's bedtime. And then there's a pretty rapid fall off of this. And so there's no more support. So, this kind of explains that little mid-afternoon lull you have and why you can sleep, those early morning hours, because there's no alerting signal. Okay, and the alertness level, the line in the middle just says, well, how sleepy are you at that time? So hope everybody gets that. Now, the sleep changes in Parkinson's. There's reduced activity levels, and this has been, I put actigraphy there because this has been proven. When people have Parkinson's, they're not moving as much. They have something called bradykinesia, or the slowing of movements, even though they have some unwanted movements with a tremor, but they're not as active. They have altered hormone release. And the interesting thing about hallucinations is that this kind of predicts how bad your sleep-wake rhythm is impaired. And hallucinations, what I think of them is, this kind of internally generated, vision that competes with wakefulness. So, wake is no longer stable, and it can be subject to, other, visual inputs from the brain. There's a lot of circadian alterations in Parkinson's disease. There's less melatonin secretion, which obviously affects it. So whatever pathway that is impaired, and you don't get as much melatonin. there's a longer time that it takes to sleep after dim light melatonin onset with dopamine treatment. So actually the meds we use can influence this as well. Now, your dim light melatonin is something that everybody has some experience with. If you've ever been camping, the sun goes down, it's usually about an hour and a half before you get sleepy. And when the sun goes down, that's when the melatonin comes up, because sunlight suppresses melatonin, and then it prepares the brain to fall asleep in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I just put the point that increased sleepiness can be seen with the lowest melatonin levels. So when the system kind of gets unraveled completely, that's when people start getting tired, because they may not have the normal regulation of sleep, like we showed in that prior slide. Okay, so you can tell that there's a circadian chapter to sleep problems in Parkinson's disease. And I kind of, broke this, down from, outside to in. And so, less exposure to light. Why is that? Well, being homebound, not being outside, you get 100,000 lux or, candle, units of light if you're outside on a bright day, 10,000 if you're out on a cloudy day. So, that's a really overwhelming input. And if you're inside, it may be 500, 600, something like that. Cataracts can block the amount of light you get. I just put that in there. There's less melanopsin and this is enhanced by dopamine. So when you lose the dopamine neurons, melanopsin is a hormone that kind of tweaks the circadian regulator in the brain, and losing those neurons makes it less able to do that. There's less light input from nerve degeneration if you have, optic tracts or behind that, gone. And the good news is that if you do get morning light exposure, like get outside, you can improve symptoms of sleepiness and sometimes your motor symptoms. So that's a to-do if you have this disorder. And the converse is true, that sometimes melatonin, if you supplement it, can improve your sleep quality and daytime sleepiness. I mean, it's not a magic pill, but it is something, it's a compensation for what the brain can't do anymore. And that's over the counter and cheap. All right, so we're going on. We have, there's treatment effects with sleepiness too. And it's kind of interesting. I put in that first bullet point that, when we give amphetamines like Ritalin, what we're doing is we're making it more difficult for dopamine to get reabsorbed by the nerve cells. So, there's a more stimulant effect there. But, the problem is that when you give dopamine, like in the form of pramipexole or rotigotine or something else, you actually can have sleep attacks. And this has been reported in the literature where people have gotten in car accidents when they're on these kind of drugs. So, the actual effects of dopamine can vary, and it's unclear exactly why this is. Naps in the afternoon can be helpful, especially if your sleep is fragmented at night. 20 to 30-minute nap can reduce your sleep drive and help you function the second half of it. Also, people sometimes give amphetamine, armodafinil, for significant sleepiness, which can be a real problem in Parkinson's disease. Now, sleepiness is rare at the onset of Parkinson's and increases over time, and this is really a function of how many nerve cells are gone. But the point is that you have this group of nerves that compromise the reticular activating system, and these are kind of dopamine-like hormones like norepinephrine or histamine or serotonin. These are all familiar names, but they all kind of as a bundle wake the brain up. And if you have these centers that are less active, you can have more sleepiness. So Strider, I want to just make a point about this because stridor is due to improper functioning of the vocal cords, and it's more of a problem in multiple system atrophy where it actually affects the head and neck nerves a little bit more. But it can be a bad problem because if you have it, a lot of people need a tracheostomy. The good news I have for you is that some people have noted that CPAP can help. And the mechanism is not exactly clear, but there are some theories about that that I won't go into. But if you have this, and stridor is more of a kind of kind of sound that you make where the vocal cords don't completely open up. Okay, moving on. Insomnia is a problem. Why is this? Well, people get insomnia with medical problems, with psychiatric problems, and both of those things are more common in Parkinson's disease, especially depression and anxiety. It does tend to get worse over time. And, actually muscular things like, cramps, the dystonia are, dystonia is the abnormal posturing of muscles or, the rigidity that people have, having to get up to go to the bathroom, or restless legs is another example. Sometimes, the stiffness gets you at night where you just have to move because, you're not moving as much, and that's something that can wake you up. And also under the insomnias, medications like selegiline, can be stimulants. So, there can be medication effects as well. Hallucinations can occur, and this happens in proximity to REM sleep, which is interesting because, as we said before, when the brain structures degenerate, you can start seeing some mixing and matching of states. And so if you have, dream content that's starting to intrude on your wakefulness, that can be, interpreted as hallucinations. Now, the one thing I'll say about this is there is this other thing called paroxysmal nocturnal hallucinosis, which, can happen in dementia in general, but the idea here is that if you don't have an opposing signal to the the waking dream phenomenon of the hallucination, sometimes putting a nightlight on in the bedroom can give you enough visual information to say flip you from dream to wake. And that may be part of why this happens, is that there's an oscillation between wake and REM, or some mixed state, which is not a normal thing. I mean, the brain usually has pretty bright lines between sleep and wake and sleep and REM sleep, but those lines get blurred with these degenerative conditions. Obstructive sleep apnea, I'm going to put that in there because common things are common and a lot of people have it, and it can be just another thing that picks away at your sleep. And we'll also not ignore medication psychosis, which can happen as the dopamine levels in your medication start getting into the higher levels. Hopefully you don't have that. But I think we have better drugs now than we used to. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just to say that periodic limb movements and restless leg syndromes are conceived as dopamine deficiency syndromes in the brain. Now, these can happen in normal people for otherwise normal people in for various reasons, but they're thought to be kind of a temporary lull in dopamine, especially in the evening. And I just want to review the symptoms of restless legs, because a lot of people who come into clinic think they have this, but on further questioning they might not. I always think that restless legs are this unavoidable urge to move legs. I mean, the urge or the compulsion has to be there, and it has to be more than just a minor foot tapping or moving your legs when you're nestling in bed. It's worse with immobilization. So if you try to keep your legs still, you can't. I mean, they force you to move. It's better temporarily with movement. So people walk around, they get some immediate relief, but then it comes back typically. Mostly at night, because in normal people, dopamine levels are higher during the day because you're moving around, and and that's what your brain produces with the movement. Family history is important because this is a genetically dominant thing, but it can happen as a secondary phenomenon of Parkinson's, and it's usually treated with dopamine drugs, but sometimes medications like gabapentin can be useful as well. Periodic limb movements, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but these are just kind of every 20 or 30-second leg jerks.
Let's see if it's your phone interfering.
Oh, okay. Did you need me to stop? Sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
All right. Sorry. Periodic limb movements are usually, something that bothers your bed partner more than you. But if you wake up with these leg jerks, if they're severe enough, they can chop your sleep up. So it's another thing to think of in the mix. Okay, parasomnias are what I'm going to spend the last few minutes talking about. And parasomnias are broadly defined as any sleep-related movement. In Parkinson's, REM behavior disorder is the most common, but you can see things like sleepwalking, myoclonus or muscle jerks, resting tremors, that happen at night can be a part of that. I put the dystonia, the posturing cramps, twisting, and bruxism. Most of these are, present to a mild degree. REM behavior disorder is clearly the most concerning. RBD was it was recognized in the 1980s. Most of them are idiopathic, but the interesting thing is that when you follow people with REM behavior disorder, it is like a warning shot for eventually developing Parkinson's disease, and can precede Parkinson's disease by up to 20 years. People think it may be a subtype of Parkinson's, and you can see it in 30 to 60% of the Parkinson's patients. But when you diagnose RBD, up to 80% of those people, if they live long enough, will develop it. And so, it's one of those ghosts of Christmas future. The secondary things that can make it worse are SSRIs, drugs like venlafaxine. Sleep apnea can, but this is more of an arousal during REM sleep, where you have spillover of the REM behaviors or the dream content into waking. And then Parkinson's disease, it's usually not as severe as the primary forms, but it's still a concern. The symptoms are laughing, crying, talking, swearing. You can have completely nice guys that swear like a sailor in their sleep, and doing fighting in your sleep. You can have very gentle people that do very violent things at night. And part of that is because for some reason, the dream content becomes more violent over time. And the thing to remember is that this is involuntary behavior. There's no interaction with the environment, as opposed to sleepwalking, where people have some basic sense of where they are, and they can navigate the environment for the most part, not completely so. And there's normal consciousness when awakened. And so one way of kind of diagnosing that, if your bed partner does this, you wake them up and say, "What were you dreaming of?" And if they tell you something that looks like what they were doing, then you can say. The interesting thing is that Parkinson's symptoms totally disappear with these episodes, which is really crazy to me, because it just means that the circuits that make you move are different than what you do during the daytime, or the regulation is different. So I'm going to have you watch a couple movies here. You'll have to give me just a second, because I want to share these with you. And if you can't see them, then somebody's got to. I'm going to do a new share here. Okay, can people see the picture at least? Well, we'll see. Okay, so this guy's sleeping. Okay, we're going to pause this, and I'm going to go back here, And I'm going to get you another one. Okay, hold on. Let me just make sure. Okay, I think you can see that. This is a little bit better visual quality. We're starting to punch the bed. Now these are, on the scale. Oh, hold on for a second. Let me get this back up. Okay. I have to go back here and I'll shut this down. Just getting out of here. All right.
This is probably one of the hottest topics in neurology.
I'm a little bit
Parkinson's disease.
Learning medicine is hard work. Osmosis makes it easy.
A movement disorder.
It takes your lecture.
Get rid of that. Okay. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so, I want to say just one thing about this because, I was riding my bike home and my neighbor, stopped me and he said, I had this dream where I was, dreaming that I was a linebacker for the Packers and the Vikings were lining up for the final field goal. There's a small gap in the line. I shot through it and I tried to block it. And that's when he ran into his bookcase and he needed 40 stitches in his head. And so, people can really get hurt by doing this. And so it just is, it's more common to get, injury and sometimes severe injury or, having the bed partner getting beat up because, you're dreaming something. So I just want to make that point. Now going on, what do you do about this? This is really the only legitimate use, I think, of, and that's going to be a broad comment, of clonazepam. Clonazepam is a benzodiazepine like Valium, but it's got a long half-life, about 2 to 3 days, and this has been about 90% effective for minimizing these behaviors, and it's been a really nice drug to use because people can have long-term control of them. Melatonin, which is a lot cheaper and more available, has been useful as well. And so I give some, basic doses. And people are already online and they're trying this stuff oftentimes before they come to clinic. Avoid agents that promote REM sleep, like Chantix. Anything that makes acetylcholine more available to the brain has the chance of, promoting REM sleep and ergo dream behaviors. But even, Aricept, which is commonly used in dementias, doesn't reliably increase REM behavior disorder. So I'm not going to say anything more about that, but just that there's drugs to use if you have this. All right, now that's all I have. And, I have two parting thoughts here. One is it's all a big mess because, the brain is slowly degenerating. But I always go back to my, spiritual mentor, which is Bob Ross. It's the imperfections that make something beautiful and what makes it different and unique from everything else. And, in terms of Parkinson's, I really like this idea because, when people have diseases, we end up learning a lot about, the underlying coordination of the brain. And when you take a look at all the neurology and physiology that's devoted to making us live on this planet and being 24-hour people, it's kind of amazing that, our brains are so finely tuned. So it shouldn't really be a big surprise that when you start losing that attunement, that things go wrong in a variety of ways. And I think our job as doctors are to try to support these systems and make the normal physiology happen to the degree possible. So that's about all I have. And if anybody has questions, then I'm ready.
Hey, Dr. Gapinski, Jeremy here. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Good. If you want to stop your screen share, that way everybody can see you as we talk, that would be great.
Does everybody want me, first of all?
What was that?
I don't know if everybody wants to see me. Hold on.
Yeah.
I'll just go back.
But who doesn't want to see Bob Ross? I mean, you got that going for you too.
Oh, gee whiz. Okay. I'm going to have to figure out how to do this. Stop share. Okay.
There we go.
Is that good?
Yep. So a couple things, questions that have come up, before today's program as well as during today's program. You mentioned restless leg syndrome.
Yeah.
If I have restless leg syndrome, does that automatically mean I'm going to have Parkinson's disease later in life, or are they different? And maybe how? Because I think I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I had restless legs, so I knew Parkinson's was coming," and I don't think that's actually accurate.
Yeah. I mean, restless leg is probably the third most common sleep disorder. And, it's a genetic problem. It's, dominantly inherited. So, you get it from your parents. Not everybody of the kids has it. But it is not a degenerative problem. We don't actually know, what the problem is, but we think that there's some problem with iron transport into the brain. And so whatever is governing that, kind of produces the syndrome, but it's not a degenerative problem like Parkinson's. So don't worry about that. It can be seen in Parkinson's, but it's that's a different pathway there.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to explain it. One of the other things, we talked a lot about exercise today. How does exercise help with sleep? Does it improve sleep? Does it not do anything? How does exercise help?
A couple ways. People are a little bit more sleepy by virtue of activity. And, activity is something that kind of goes away as Parkinson's advances. But it's also, the activity helps, because in some sense, you're more tired. I can give you examples of this, but it's also getting you outside and light exposed that is also helpful. So these are things that, support the human daytime, that we do. I mean, people would normally do this, and so that's what helps, set the rhythm of life. And even if you don't have Parkinson's or you're disabled for some other way, you can see these systems start to devolve, and it becomes more difficult to maintain the day-night cycle.
So you just talked about daylight. You also talked about melatonin earlier.
Yeah.
I usually like to joke, we've been fortunate this year. We've had a pretty nice November, but usually here in Wisconsin, winter seems to go from like August 31st till June 1st. So how do we get melatonin, and how do we get some of that exposure in these winter months when we know it's going to get cold and gray, and daylight lasts from like noon to 1, I think?
Yeah, I mean, I like getting it naturally. So, even if you get outside for 20 minutes, that's great. If you can't, just make sure that all the blinds are up and the curtains are exposed and that you're in a sunny place, because you get probably enough light that way. Just don't live life in a cave is, I guess, the point. If you want to do this artificially, you can, but they sell, commercial light units that, are not totally expensive, but it can give you decent amounts of light exposure. And, that's something to do during the daytime hours, just to kind of perk you up, especially in the morning is where light is most important in helping regulate sleep onset.
Okay. Thank you. I think those are good tips. If I want to get a sleep assessment, I've been talking to my doctor, I'm having sleep issues. What steps do I have to go through to get to see you? Is there a referral? I just call you? How does that all go?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, the primary care doctors just put in a referral to me, and then you see one of the providers in the sleep clinic. I think that's the easiest way, because there's a paper trail then, and things get scheduled. So that's the way to do it. There are people who come in for a very specific problem, like if you have a lot of clinical evidence of sleep apnea, sometimes we'll just route you to the lab because you need a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether sleep apnea is present. And the sleep study can do that.
Okay. All right. And then the last question I have, and we've touched on in a couple of other speakers already, anxiety. We have a lot of things to be anxious about right now, just the way everything in the world is going. How does that affect sleep, and what are some of the maybe tips or techniques you would give people to help deal with anxiety if it's impacting their daily living or their sleep patterns?
Yeah, I think, first of all, draw a distinction between anxiety symptoms and an anxiety disorder, which is kind of the far end of severity. But, I think mindfulness, meditation are likely going to be helpful. Even distraction. If you have the ruminating thoughts at night, do something that occupies the brain that gets you off of the rail that you're thinking about. So, watch Netflix or read or distract your mind. And that's oftentimes things that we tell people to do with insomnia disorders is get out of the bedroom, because you don't want to make the bedroom the worry place or the rumination place. But get out for a specific time, like take your phone and put the timer on it for 20 minutes or so, and do something that distracts you. Because then once you divert your attention away from the psychic concern, then that can settle the brain down as well. But I like to tell people not to do things like don't do meditation or pray to solve this problem. You have to distract yourself. So you have to do something that maybe you want to do, and that is something that your brain then pays attention to.
Perfect. I appreciate that. I think those are some great tips for people, and it'll help, especially as the holidays are coming around, and help us kind of change our focus a little bit. I want to thank you for joining us. Your topic, sleep and Parkinson's disease. Every evaluation I've done this year on all our virtual programs, the number one topic they've asked for is sleep. So I really appreciate you giving us your time and touching on that for a lot of people, and I'm sure the audience appreciates it. As I've joked with our other virtual speakers, if you listen, I'm sure you can hear them clapping right now. They're so happy for it. So thank you very much.
And they are.
Yeah. So, well, you have a great rest of your day.